everyone, Kaitlin Busch, back again with the third episode of the Brain Speech Bubble. Today, we're going to talk about receptive language. If you remember from the last episode of the Brain Speech Bubble, language can be broken down into two categories: expressive language, or what we're saying to our communication partner, and receptive language, which is how we understand what is being said to us. Receptive language is a huge part of what speech therapists work on and is often surprising to people. Many people think that speech and language involve only our output, or what comes out of our mouth. But in reality, half of communication is actually understanding what's being said to you. If you think about it this way, if you're speaking to someone who maybe speaks another language or has a really thick accent, they're talking away, they're expressing themselves just fine, but you, as the listener, are having a hard time understanding what they're saying. That's kind of equivalent to a receptive language impairment. You know you're being communicated with, you recognize maybe some of the words, but a lot of the message is lost. Receptive language can include understanding questions, following directions, making inferences, or even comprehension of what is read. Receptive language is incredibly important for children to develop for success, both in school and beyond. If your child has a receptive language impairment, there are lots of things you can do to help support them. You can break down your directions into single steps, or you can use visual supports where possible. You can check for understanding regularly. You can explain complex ideas using simple, understandable language, to name a few. Now it's time for our receptive language activity of the day, Simon Says. This game is so simple, but it's incredibly beneficial for the critical receptive language skill of following directions. I'm sure you're familiar with what Simon Says involves, so rather than explain something you already know, I'm going to go ahead and share why it's a great tool and what you're actually working on when you play. Simon Says, in its simplest form, is a following directions game. You ask your child to do an action, they do it. However, when you add the Simon Says element, it requires your child to listen for the details. This is actually a conditional direction using the if-then format. If Simon says, then you do that action. If Simon does not say, first, then you do not do that action. Conditional directions are an area of receptive language skills that most kids could use a little extra help with. If your child is getting the hang of the activity as you're playing Simon Says, add another step. This will turn your conditional direction into a two-step conditional direction. You can say, Simon says stand on one foot and touch your nose, and you've bumped up the complexity of your direction and you're working on a higher level skill. You can go even further and modify Simon Says into an explicit if-then version. You could change your direction to be, if something is true, then you do the action. For example, if dogs have fur, then tap your head. Or, if cows lay eggs, sit down. I love Simon Says because it requires no materials, no prep, minimal effort, and most people already know how to play. Well, that'll do it for another episode of the Brain Speech Bubble. I also want to remind you that I'm available to provide speech and language therapy via telehealth through Brains. Please call the number listed to schedule an appointment or for questions. You can also reach me directly at the email shown. I hope you enjoyed this receptive language activity, and always remember, keep those kids talking.